I want to start with a piece of paper. I have it here. I am going to read you 2 sentences from it. Then I am going to ask you to look for what is missing between those 2 sentences. That is where the story is. The story is in the gap. The paper is an after-action report. It is dated 14 August 2004. It is from a United States Marine Corps Civil Affairs team operating in the western quarter of Mosul, Iraq. It is unclassified. It has been unclassified for 19 years. You can request it. I requested it. It took 14 months. They sent it to me with 3 names redacted in black marker, a unit designation half-blocked, and a coffee stain in the upper left corner that I do not think was deliberate. I think someone was eating lunch when they pulled it from the file. The first sentence reads, Civil Affairs Operation, Mosul, 14 August 2004. No incident. The second sentence reads, Operation conducted to prevent escalation. I want you to sit with that for a second. The first sentence says nothing happened. The second sentence says they did something to keep nothing from happening. Both sentences are in the same paragraph. The same paragraph. They are next to each other on the page. Some Marine captain wrote them both in the same evening, probably by lamplight in a plywood-walled office, probably with a half-cold MRE on the desk next to him, and he did not see the contradiction. Or he saw it and did not care. Or he saw it and could not figure out what else to write. Because what he wanted to write, he was not allowed to write. What he wanted to write was, a 24-year-old specialist from Dearborn, Michigan, sat down on a rug in a courtyard with 40 armed men and an angry village elder and an empty thermos, and she stayed there for 2 hours, and she drank tea, and nobody fired a shot, and the entire story stops there. That is what he wanted to write. He could not write that. The form did not have a box for it. The form had a box for incidents. There was no incident. The form had a box for actions taken. The action taken was, a young woman drank tea. You cannot write that on an after-action report. You write, Operation conducted to prevent escalation. And you put the report in the file. And you go to bed. I have been looking for the woman who drank the tea for 10 years. I am going to tell you what I found. I did not find her. That is the first thing I want to say. I did not find her, in the sense that she is not going to talk to me. She is not going to confirm anything. She is not going to sit down across from me at a kitchen table the way other women have done for this channel. She refused. She refused politely. She refused by email, in a single line, no signature. I appreciate your interest, but I do not want to participate. That was it. That was the whole reply. I respected it for 6 months. Then I called her anyway. I called her at her office. I will not say which office. I will say it has a foggy bottom address and a security desk in the lobby and a particular kind of silence in the hallways that you only find in buildings where people read other people's mail for a living. I called her direct line. She answered. I said, Ma'am, this is Hatch Holloway. I wrote you in March. She said, I remember. I said, I am going to make this video whether you talk to me or not. I would rather make it with you. She said, Mr. Holloway, I understand you have a job to do. I am asking you, as a courtesy, not to use my name. I said, I will change your name. I will change the city. I will move the date by 3 weeks. She said, thank you. She hung up. I changed her name. I changed the city. I moved the date by 3 weeks. I am about to spend the next 2 hours telling you a story about a person I am calling Yasmin Khoury, who grew up in a place I am calling Dearborn, who served in a place I am calling Mosul. None of those 3 things are exactly true, and all of them are close enough. The woman is real. The day is real. The rug is real. The thermos is real. I lied about the easy things so I could tell you the hard thing. The hard thing is the truth. Her father came from Beirut in 1982. He was 26. He came alone. His mother and his 2 younger sisters stayed behind because his mother said somebody had to stay with the apartment. His father was already dead by then. His father had been dead for 4 years. His father had been a typesetter at a newspaper in West Beirut and had been killed not by a bomb and not by a sniper, but by a heart attack, in his chair, at his desk, in 1978, at the age of 51, with a cigarette still burning in the ashtray. The family did not talk about him much because the way he died was, by Beirut standards in those years, embarrassingly ordinary. He had not been martyred. He had just stopped. The son, the man I am calling Khoury's father, left in '82 because the Israelis came into the city that summer and he watched, from the roof of his cousin's building, an apartment block on the next street collapse from a single artillery round. And he decided in that moment, on that roof, that he was going to America. He did not know how. He did not have papers. He had 2 years of engineering school and bad English and one address in the United States, written on the inside flap of a paperback novel, the address of a second cousin in a place called Dearborn, Michigan, who he had never met, but whose mother had sent his mother a Christmas card, in Arabic, every year for 15 years. He got out through Cyprus. He got to New York in November. He got to Dearborn in January, in the worst snowstorm of the decade, wearing a windbreaker and dress shoes, and carrying a single suitcase that contained, among other things, his father's pocket watch, which did not run, and a Quran, and 3 changes of clothes, and a photograph of his mother standing in front of the building they used to live in before they moved to the smaller building. The second cousin took him in. The second cousin found him a job at a bakery on Warren Avenue. He worked at the bakery for 4 years. Then he opened his own grocery, 2 doors down, with money he had saved and money he had borrowed from every Lebanese family in a 6-block radius. And he ran that grocery for the next 31 years, until he sold it in 2017 to a young couple from Yemen who kept his name on the awning out of respect. He married a woman from Tripoli, Lebanon, not Tripoli, Libya, in 1988. She had come over the year before to live with her aunt. She was 22. He was 32. The wedding was at a Maronite church in Detroit. The reception was in the basement of the church. There were 97 people. There is a photograph of the 2 of them cutting the cake. And in the photograph, he is not looking at the cake, and he is not looking at the camera. He is looking at her. And his face has the expression of a man who has gotten away with something and cannot believe it. Their first daughter was born in 1989. They named her after his mother, who was still alive in Beirut, and who would die 3 years later without ever meeting the granddaughter who carried her name. The name was Yasmin. That is one of the things I did not change. I should have. I cannot. Forgive me. Some things will not bend. Yasmin grew up above the grocery. The apartment was 3 rooms over the store. Her bed was in the room with the window that faced Warren Avenue, and on summer nights, she could hear the bell on the door of the shop ring every time her father had a late customer, and she would lie there and count the bells and try to guess from the rhythm of the bell whether it was a regular customer or a stranger. By the time she was 8, she could tell. By the time she was 10, she could tell who it was, by name, just from the bell. She spoke Arabic at home and English at school, and a particular Dearborn Lebanese hybrid in the aisles of the grocery, where the customers would come in speaking one language and switch to the other mid-sentence depending on what they were buying. Cigarettes were in English. Olive oil was in Arabic. Lottery tickets were in English. Spices were in Arabic. Diapers were in English. Funeral arrangements were in Arabic. She did not learn this. She absorbed it. By the time she was 12, she could code switch 4 times in a single transaction without noticing she was doing it. She was a quiet kid. Her sister, who came along in 1992, was the loud one, the funny one, the one who got in trouble at school for talking. Yasmin was the one who read. She read in both languages. She read whatever was in the house, which was, between her father's shelf and the children's books her mother had bought at garage sales, an unusually wide range. She read the Quran, in Arabic, by the time she was 9. She read Little Women, in English, by the time she was 10. She read a Lebanese novelist named Hanan al-Sheikh that her mother had tried to hide from her, and that she found anyway by the time she was 13, and she did not understand most of it, and the parts she did understand she did not tell her mother she had read. She was not popular. She was not unpopular. She was the kind of kid that teachers remembered 10 years later not because she had done anything spectacular, but because she had been so consistently, quietly present. She got good grades. She did not play sports. She went to the library on Saturdays. She helped her father in the store on Sundays. She graduated from Fordson High School in 1998 with a class rank somewhere in the top 10%, and she got into Georgetown University on a partial scholarship to study Arabic and Middle Eastern affairs. Her father did not want her to go, not because Georgetown, because Washington. He had a particular fear of Washington that he had carried with him from Beirut, a fear of capital cities, a fear of buildings with marble steps. He told her she could go to Wayne State and live at home. She told him no. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She just kept saying no in the same flat tone every time he brought it up for 3 weeks until he stopped bringing it up. Her mother packed her suitcase the night before she left and put a small Quran in the side pocket without telling her, and Yasmin found it on the train, and she kept it in her dorm room for the next 4 years, on the windowsill, never opened, but never put away. She started Georgetown in the fall of '98. She studied Arabic, which she already knew, because the program was about reading classical Arabic and not about speaking modern Arabic, and the classical Arabic was new to her and difficult and beautiful. She studied modern standard Arabic, which she already half knew. She studied Persian, which she did not know at all, and which she found that she loved. The way the alphabet was the same as Arabic, but the rhythm was completely different. The way Persian poetry felt like singing, while Arabic poetry felt like architecture. She studied history. She studied political science. She did not party. She did not date. She called home every Sunday at 6 in the evening and talked to her mother for an hour, and her father for 10 minutes, and her sister for as long as her sister felt like talking, which varied. She was 3 years into the program. She was 20 years old. It was the second week of September of 2001. She was in a Tuesday morning class on the geography of the Persian Gulf when a teaching assistant came into the room and whispered to the professor, and the professor stopped lecturing and said, "I think we should turn on the television. I am not going to walk you through that day. You know that day? Everyone who was alive on that day knows that day. What I will tell you is what Yasmin did on that day, which is what she told a friend much later in a conversation that was relayed to me, third hand, by a person who I trust about 90%. Yasmin sat in the lounge of her dorm and watched the television for 6 hours. She did not cry. She did not call home. At the end of the 6 hours, she went up to her room, and she took down the small Quran from the windowsill, the one her mother had packed without telling her, and she opened it for the first time in 3 years, and she read for a while, and then she closed it and put it back, and she went down to the cafeteria and ate dinner alone. She did not drop out that week. She did not drop out that month. She finished the semester. She went home for Christmas. She told her parents, on the second day of Christmas break, sitting at the kitchen table after her sister had gone to bed, that she was going to leave Georgetown in May and enlist in the United States Army. Her mother put down her teacup. Her father did not put down his. Her father said, in Arabic, a sentence I am going to translate as carefully as I can, because the translation matters. You are not going to fix what they did to us by doing what they ask of you. Yasmin said, in English, I am not trying to fix anything. I am trying to be useful in a language they do not have enough of. Her father did not speak to her for 3 days. Then he spoke to her. Then he drove her back to Washington in January in his grocery van, with the back full of olive oil and za'atar and her 2 suitcases, and he kissed her on both cheeks at the curb in front of her dorm, and he said, in Arabic, be careful with the language. The language is more dangerous than the gun. She said, I know, Baba. He said, no, you do not. But you will. She enlisted in May of 2002. She did not finish her degree. She had 3 semesters left. Georgetown held her credits. She enlisted as an 09 Lima, which in the Army at that time meant interpreter translator, a relatively new MOS that the Army was scrambling to fill because they had suddenly realized, in late 2001, that they had almost no Arabic speakers in uniform, and they were about to need a great many of them. She did basic at Fort Jackson. She did her language qualification at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, even though she already spoke the language better than any of her instructors, because the Army required it. She used the time at Monterey to learn Persian properly and to start on Pashto, which she found brutal and beautiful and which she never really mastered, but which she was good enough at, by the time she left Monterey, to read a road sign and understand a market argument. She arrived in Iraq in March of 2004. She was 24 years old. She was assigned to a civil affairs team attached to a Marine battalion in Mosul. Civil affairs is the part of the military that does the things the military does not like to admit it does: building schools, paying claims for damaged property, sitting down with mayors and tribal sheiks, figuring out which contractor to use and which contractor to avoid, untangling water disputes and bread shortages, and the slow, constant friction of an occupation that nobody on either side had asked for and nobody on either side knew how to end. The team had a captain, a gunnery sergeant, for enlisted Marines, 2 contracted interpreters, and her. She was the only Army soldier on the team. She was the only woman. She was the only one who could read. I want to be careful here. The 2 contracted interpreters could read. They were both Iraqi nationals, both from Baghdad, both highly educated, both extremely brave men who took risks every day that nobody on this channel will ever fully understand. What I mean when I say she was the only one who could read is something more specific. She could read the room. She could read the silence between sentences. She could read which word a man was choosing not to say. She could read whether a sheik's 3rd cousin, sitting in the corner not drinking tea, was the actual decision maker. She could read the difference between a polite refusal and a real refusal. She could read the part of the language that is not in the language. She had learned it from her father, in the grocery, on Warren Avenue, watching him decide in 3 seconds whether the man who had just walked in was going to buy a pack of Marlboros and leave, or whether he was going to stand at the counter for 40 minutes complaining about his brother-in-law. She had learned it without knowing she was learning it. By the time she got to Mosul, she had been reading rooms for 20 years, and she did not know that this was a skill, because she did not know that other people could not do it. The captain figured it out in about 3 weeks. The captain was a man I am going to call Tom Pellegrino, which is not his name. Pellegrino was 31 years old, a graduate of Villanova, a Philadelphia kid, a Marine reservist who in his civilian life worked as a city planner for the Camden, New Jersey municipal government, and who had been activated in late 2003 and who was, by his own later admission, slightly out of his depth in Mosul and aware of it, and trying very hard not to show it. Pellegrino was a good captain. The reason I know he was a good captain is that he figured out, within 3 weeks, that the most valuable person on his team was the 24-year-old Army specialist who had been assigned to him as a backup interpreter, and he started giving her room. He started bringing her into meetings he could have run without her. He started asking her, after meetings, what she had heard. He started, by April, asking her opinion before the meetings about who would be in the room and what they would want and what they would not say. This is rare. I want to underline that this is rare. The default behavior of a young captain in a combat zone in 2004, when handed a young female enlisted soldier with a Lebanese last name as a translator, was not to listen to her. The default behavior was to use her as a mouth, push English in one ear, take Arabic out the other, and never ask her what she thought. Pellegrino did not do that. I do not know why. I have not been able to ask him. He died in 2014 of a brain tumor in a hospice in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, at the age of 41, and the only reason I know any of this about him is that his widow, who I tracked down through the Marine Corps Association, was willing to talk to me on the phone for 45 minutes one Tuesday afternoon last March, and she told me, among other things, that her husband had kept a small notebook from his deployment and that in the notebook there was a page that said, and I am quoting from her reading the page to me over the phone, "K, is the smartest person on this team. Do not get in her way. Just K. Just the letter. He had not even written the rest of the name. He had been worried about losing the notebook. So, we have arrived at August of 2004. I am going to slow down now, because the thing I am about to describe took 2 hours in real time, and I want to give it the time it deserves. And I want you to feel the heat of that courtyard and the dust, and the way the light moved across the wall over the course of those 2 hours, because the light is part of the story. The light is one of the things she remembered in the journal she kept, the journal that I was allowed to read 4 pages of in a foggy bottom office, with a State Department lawyer sitting across the table from me. On a Wednesday in June of last year, after I had signed 3 pages of non-disclosure and agreed not to quote directly from the journal, but only to paraphrase. The light, she wrote, came in across the western wall in a line, and the line moved. And by the time the elder finally smiled, the line had moved off the wall entirely and was on the floor. That is roughly what she wrote. She did not write it as a metaphor. She wrote it because she had been watching the light for 2 hours, because watching the light was a way of not watching the rifles. The day started at 4 in the morning. In Mosul in August, it has to start at 4 in the morning, because by 10 it is already 110 degrees, and by 2 in the afternoon nobody, on either side, wants to do anything except sit in shade and hate the sun. The civil affairs team was scheduled to do a routine visit to a neighborhood on the west side of the city, a Sunni neighborhood, mostly working class, where there had been complaints about a water main and where Pellegrino had promised the local sheik that he would come and look at it personally. They left the FOB at 05:30. They were in 3 Humvees. Khoury was in the second Humvee, in the right rear seat, with a notebook on her lap and a bottle of water between her boots and her rifle pointed at the floor. They got to the neighborhood at 06:15. They looked at the water main. The water main was a problem, but it was a problem that required an engineer, and Pellegrino did not have an engineer with him, so he made notes and promised to come back on Thursday with someone who could actually fix it. The sheik was satisfied. The sheik offered tea. They drank tea. By 0800 they were ready to leave. It was at 0800 that the first runner came. He was a boy, maybe 14, in a long white shirt and sandals and a Manchester United cap, and he came running down the street from the direction of the mosque, and he was shouting, and Khoury could hear him from a block away. He was shouting that the Americans had robbed the mosque. Not these Americans. Other Americans. Marines. Last night, they had come in. They had taken something. The imam was at the mosque now. The imam was very angry. The imam had called the elder. The elder was coming. The elder was bringing men. Pellegrino did not understand any of this. He understood that the boy was shouting and that the sheik, the local sheik whose tea they had just been drinking, was now standing very still and looking at Khoury with an expression that Pellegrino did not have a name for. He turned to Khoury. He said, "What is happening?" Khoury said, very quietly, in English, "Captain, we need to get back in the trucks. Now." Pellegrino said, "Tell me what is happening." Khoury said, "I will." "In the truck." Now. They got in the trucks. They moved 2 blocks. They stopped in a small open area, not quite a square, more of a wide place where 3 streets met, with a low wall on one side and a dry fountain in the middle, and Pellegrino told the gunnery sergeant to set up a perimeter, and he pulled Khoury out of the second Humvee, and he said, "Now tell me." And she told him. There had been, the night before, a raid. Not by their unit, by a different unit. A Marine infantry company, operating on intelligence about a weapons cache, had entered a building adjacent to the mosque, and in the course of clearing the building they had, allegedly, also entered the mosque. They had entered the mosque in their boots. Boots in a mosque is, depending on the mosque and the imam and the day, somewhere between an embarrassing mistake and a religious atrocity. In this mosque, on this day, with this imam, it was the second one, and the imam was further claiming that something had been taken. A box, a wooden box that had been kept in a small room behind the prayer hall. The imam was saying the box contained money that had been collected for the upkeep of the mosque. The imam was saying the Americans had stolen it. Pellegrino said, "Did they?" Khoury said, "I have no idea." Pellegrino said, "How do we find out?" Khoury said, "We do not. We do not find out. We sit. We wait. The elder is coming. When the elder comes, we sit with him. We do not stand. We do not have rifles in our hands. We sit. We let him talk. He will talk for a long time. We let him. He will not actually be talking about the box. The box is what he will start with. The box is not what it is about." Pellegrino said, "What is it about?" Khoury said, "I will know in about an hour." The elder arrived 20 minutes later. He did not come alone. The first count Pellegrino made, looking down the street through the optic on his rifle, was 28 men. By the time they had all gathered in the open area near the dry fountain, the count was closer to 40. Some had AK-47s. Some had older rifles. Some had nothing visible, but were standing in the kind of way that suggested something was tucked into a waistband. None of them were pointing weapons. None of them were shouting. They were just there. 40 men, standing, looking, waiting. The elder was a man in his late 60s, in a clean white dish dasha and a checkered keffiyeh and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him the slightly incongruous look of a retired schoolteacher, which, as it would turn out, was exactly what he had been before the war, and before the previous war, and before the war before that. He had 3 sons standing behind him. The middle son had one hand on the elder's elbow, lightly, the way you steady someone you love when you are worried about their footing. The middle son was the one Khoury watched. The middle son was the one whose face she was reading. Pellegrino said to her, very quietly, "What do we do?" Khoury said, "Take off your helmet." Pellegrino said, "What?" She said, "Take off your helmet. Put your rifle on the hood of the Humvee. Walk forward 6 steps. Stop. Do not say anything. I am going to walk past you. I am going to keep walking. I am going to stop in front of him. I am going to sit down. When I sit down, he will sit down. When he sits down, you walk forward another 6 steps and stand behind me. No helmet, no rifle, hands visible. Do not talk. Do not nod. Do not smile. Just be there." Pellegrino said, "You want me to send you in there with no security?" She said, "I want you to send me in there with the only security that matters, which is the absence of a reason to shoot me." He looked at her for a second. He took off his helmet. He put his rifle on the hood. He walked 6 steps forward. She walked past him. She had taken off her own helmet too, and she had taken off her body armor, which she had unbuckled and dropped on the seat of the Humvee, and she had set her rifle on the floor of the truck. She had a thermos in her right hand. She had picked it up from the floor of the truck without explaining. The thermos was olive drab, dented on one side, with a screw-on cap that doubled as a cup. She had refilled it with hot water at the FOB at 4:15 that morning. There were 2 tea bags in her cargo pocket. They were not Iraqi tea bags. They were Lipton. They were the kind of tea bags she had grown up with in the back room of a grocery on Warren Avenue. They were a tiny act of disrespect, a tiny mismatch, and she knew it. And she did it anyway, because she did not have anything better, and because the thermos itself was the gesture, not what was in it. She walked toward the elder. She stopped about 10 feet in front of him. She did not extend her hand. She did not say good morning. She put her right hand to her chest, briefly, palm flat, in the gesture that in that part of the world means something close to, "I greet you with my heart before my mouth." Then she said, in Arabic, and I am translating, "Peace be upon you, Haji. My name is Yasmin. I am the daughter of Elias, who was the son of Bishara, of the family Khoury, of the village of Ain Ebal, which is in the south of Lebanon. I am here as a soldier of the United States Army, but I am here before you as the daughter of my father, who taught me that when a man older than me speaks, I sit and I listen, and I do not interrupt, and I do not leave until he tells me he is finished. May I sit with you?" She had thought about that introduction for the entire 3 minutes it had taken the elder to walk down the street. She had constructed it word by word. The village name was real. It was the village her father's mother had been born in, before she moved to Beirut as a young woman. Yasmin had never been there. She had only seen photographs. She named it because it was a southern Lebanese village, a Christian village in fact, a Maronite village, and she wanted the elder to know, immediately, that she was not pretending to be something she was not. She was not Iraqi. She was not Sunni. She was not Muslim. She was a Lebanese-American Christian girl in an American Army uniform, and she was telling him exactly that, in his own language, in a sentence whose grammar was perfect and whose vocabulary was old-fashioned in a way that she knew, from the way her father's friends spoke when they came over for coffee, would land in his ear as the speech of a person raised by people who came from somewhere. The elder looked at her. He did not move for what Pellegrino, watching from 20 feet away, later said felt like a full minute, but which was probably closer to 15 seconds. Then the elder said, in Arabic, "Sit, daughter of Elias." He gestured to the ground. One of his sons, the middle one, the one with his hand on the elder's elbow, immediately produced a rolled rug from somewhere. Khoury never figured out where. She said it was as if the rug had appeared from inside the man's shirt and unrolled it on the ground in front of the dry fountain. The elder sat. Khoury sat. Pellegrino, behind her, walked his 6 steps forward and stood with his hands at his sides. The 40 men did not sit. The 40 men stayed standing, in a loose horseshoe shape behind the elder, weapons at low ready or slung. The 4 Marines from the Civil Affairs team stayed where they were, near the Humvees, weapons at low ready, helmets on, body armor on, sweating already. The gunnery sergeant, who I am not going to name even with a fake name because his widow asked me not to, made a single-hand signal to the other Marines that meant, roughly, nobody moves, nobody twitches, nobody so much as adjusts a strap until I tell you to. Then he stood very still and watched. The first hour was about the box. The elder talked about the box for a long time. He described the box. It was wooden, he said. It was made by a carpenter in this neighborhood 15 years ago, a man named Abu Salim, who is now dead. May God have mercy on him. The box was the size of a man's 2 hands held together. It had a brass clasp. It had been kept on a shelf in the small room behind the prayer hall, the room where the imam kept his books and his prayer beads and the registry of the families of the neighborhood. The box contained money. The money had been collected over the course of 3 years. Some of it was for the maintenance of the mosque. Some of it was for the widow of a man named Hussein, who had died last winter, leaving 4 children. Some of it was for a young man who needed an operation in Amman. Khoury did not interrupt. She listened. She nodded, very slightly, every few sentences, in the rhythm of an Arabic listener, the small clicks of the tongue, the small exhalations, the soft naam. That means yes, but in this context means, I am still here. I am still listening. Please continue. Every 15 minutes or so she unscrewed the cap of the thermos and poured a small amount of hot water into it, and offered it to the elder, who at first refused, then on the 3rd offer accepted, and drank, and from that point onward there was tea between them, even though the tea was nothing more than warm Lipton water, even though the cup was a thermos cap, even though they were sitting on a rug in the dust in the middle of a half-square in Mosul with 40 armed men behind one of them and 4 armed Marines behind the other. Pellegrino, standing behind her, understood maybe 1 word in 15. He did not move. He had been told not to move. He stood in the sun with his hands at his sides for the entire 2 hours, and by the end, he could not feel his fingers, and he had a sunburn on the back of his neck that would peel for the next 3 weeks. He told his wife about it years later. He said, I have never been so useless and so necessary at the same time in my entire life. About 40 minutes in, the elder stopped talking about the box. He started talking about his oldest son. His oldest son, he said, had gone to America in 1992. He had gone to a city called Detroit. He worked there as a mechanic. He had a wife. He had 3 children. The youngest child, a girl, was named Salma, and she was 4 years old, and the elder had never met her. He had a photograph of her in his wallet. He took out the wallet. He took out the photograph. He showed it to Khoury. The photograph was a school photograph of a small girl in a pink dress with a missing front tooth and a serious expression in front of a blue background. Khoury looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she said, in Arabic, "Haji, I know the street where your son lives." The elder said, "How?" She said, "There are not so many streets in Detroit where the families from this part of the world live. I grew up in Dearborn, which is next to Detroit. My father has a grocery on Warren Avenue. If you tell me your son's name, I will know if I have met him." The elder told her the son's name. She did not know the son. She did not pretend to know the son. She said, "I do not know him, but I know two families with that name on Warren Avenue, and one of them has a cousin who is a mechanic, and when I go home I will ask." The elder put the photograph back in his wallet. He put the wallet back in his pocket. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, in Arabic, a sentence that Khoury wrote down in her journal that night, and that I am paraphrasing because I am not allowed to quote it. "The world is very small, and the Americans do not know it, and that is most of the trouble between us." She did not respond to that. She was not supposed to respond to that. She nodded. The second hour was about everything else. The elder talked about the war. Not this war. The war with Iran in the 80s. He had been a teacher then, in a town near the southern border, and he had lost two of his nephews in the same week in 1986, and he had buried them both in the same hour, and the family had never recovered, and his sister, the mother of the nephews, had died of grief 2 years later, and he held the Americans responsible for none of it, but he held the world responsible for all of it. He talked about the sanctions. He talked about his daughter, who had been a medical student in Baghdad in the 90s, and who had been unable to finish her degree because the medical school had no supplies, no anesthetic, no antibiotics, and who now lived in Jordan and worked as a pharmacist assistant, which was a job beneath her training, but which paid for her 2 children. He talked about the imam at the mosque. The imam was a young man, he said, only 32 years old, and he had only been the imam at this mosque for 14 months. And he was a good man, but he was a young man, and young men sometimes make a small thing into a large thing because they do not yet know which things are small. The line of light moved across the western wall as he talked. Khoury watched it move. By the time the elder had finished talking about the imam, the line of light had moved off the wall entirely and was on the floor of the courtyard, and a small dog had come into the open area from one of the side streets and laid down in the shade of the dry fountain. And one of the men standing behind the elder had at some point during the hour put down his rifle, leaned it against the wall, and sat down on the curb. Khoury did not push. She had not asked a single question for the entire 2 hours. She had only listened. And then, when the elder had been quiet for about 30 seconds, looking at his hands, she said, in Arabic, "Haji, may I tell you something?" He said, "Yes." She said, "I do not think the Marines took the box. I think the box is somewhere in the mosque. I think when the soldiers came in last night, in their boots, in the dark, with their lights, they frightened the imam, and the imam moved the box, and in the morning he could not remember where he had moved it. I think the imam is a young man, as you say, and he is ashamed that he cannot find the box, and so it is easier for him to say that the Americans took it than to say that he himself misplaced it. I do not know this. I am only saying what I think." The elder did not respond for a while. Then he said, in Arabic, it would not be the first time. Then he said, "But it does not matter whether they took it or not. It matters that they came in with their boots." She said, "Yes, Haji, I know." He said, "Will you tell your captain?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Will it stop?" She said, "I do not know. I will ask him to ask. I cannot promise." He said, "That is honest." He said, "Thank you for not promising." He said, "Most of you promise." Then he reached out, and he took her right hand in both of his hands, and he held it for a moment, and then he let it go. And then he stood up, and the entire 40-man horseshoe behind him stood a little straighter. And he turned, and he walked, slowly, with his middle son's hand on his elbow, back down the street toward the mosque. And the 40 men turned, and they followed him. And in less than 3 minutes, the entire open area was empty, except for Khoury still sitting on the rug, and Pellegrino still standing behind her with his hands at his sides, and the 4 Marines still by the Humvees, and the small dog still asleep in the shade of the dry fountain. Pellegrino said, very quietly, "What just happened?" Khoury said, "We should go." Pellegrino said, "Are we okay?" Khoury said, "Today?" "Yes." Pellegrino said, "Tomorrow?" Khoury said, "I do not know. We need to find out about that box. We need to find out who was in that mosque last night. We need to find them, and we need to make them write a letter." Pellegrino said, "A letter?" Khoury said, "A letter of apology. To the Imam. In Arabic. Hand-delivered. By someone senior. I will write it. They will sign it. We will bring it on Thursday when we come back for the water main." Pellegrino said, "That is not how this works." Khoury said, "It is how this works now. Captain, I am asking you." Pellegrino looked at her for a long second. He said, "Okay, specialist. We will do that." They got in the trucks. They drove back to the FOB. It was 10:40 in the morning. The temperature was 103 degrees. The dust, when it settled out of the air after the convoy passed, settled onto the rug, which the elder's middle son had not rolled up and taken with him, which had been left, deliberately or by accident, on the ground in front of the dry fountain, where it remained for the rest of the day and possibly for the rest of the week, because nobody from the civil affairs team ever went back to that exact spot, and the rug, in Khoury's memory, simply stayed there, in the sun, accumulating dust, becoming part of the city. Pellegrino wrote the after-action report that evening. He wrote it in the plywood-walled office I described at the beginning. He wrote 2 sentences that contradicted each other, and he did not fix the contradiction. He wrote, "No incident." He wrote, "Operation conducted to prevent escalation." He filed the report. He went to bed. He also did one other thing. He wrote, in his small notebook, the one his widow read to me from over the phone, on a fresh page, 2 lines. The first line said, "K. Drank tea for 2 hours and saved my career." The second line said, "Nobody will ever know." He was right. Nobody knew. The report went into the file. The file went into the system. The system did not know what to do with a report that said nothing had happened. The system filed it under routine civil affairs activity, August 2004, Mosul AO, and it sat there, untouched, for 19 years, until a freelance journalist in Tucson, Arizona, requested it under the Freedom of Information Act in 2023 and waited 14 months for it to arrive in the mail with 3 names redacted and a coffee stain in the upper left corner. The letter of apology was written. Khoury wrote it in Arabic, in her own handwriting, the next afternoon. It was 1 paragraph long. It said, in essence, that the United States Marine Corps regretted any disrespect shown to the mosque and to the imam in the course of the operation of the previous evening, that no theft had occurred from the Marine side, that any property which had been temporarily misplaced should be returned to its rightful place, that the Marine Corps would take measures to ensure that future operations were conducted in a manner consistent with respect for places of worship, and that the signatory, Captain Thomas Pellegrino, Civil Affairs, asked the imam's forgiveness personally and as a representative of the United States. Khoury translated the letter into English for Pellegrino. Pellegrino took it to his battalion commander. The battalion commander did not want to sign it. The battalion commander said, "We did not do anything wrong." Pellegrino said, and his widow told me this. She remembered the line exactly because he had used the same line with her once during an argument about her mother. "Sir, I did not say we did anything wrong. I said we are going to apologize. Those are different things." The battalion commander signed the letter. Pellegrino delivered it on Thursday when the engineer came to look at the water main. He delivered it through Khoury to the elder, who took it to the imam. The imam read it. The imam, 2 days later, sent a message back through the elder that he had found the box. The box had been, as Khoury had suspected, in the mosque the entire time. The imam had moved it during the raid and had not remembered moving it. The money was intact, $612 American. In mixed currency, the widow Hussein received her share. The young man who needed the operation in Amman went, eventually, and the operation was successful, and he came home, and he is, as far as I have been able to determine, still alive today, working as a baker in a neighborhood not very far from the one where this story took place. There was no medal. There was no commendation. There was no mention in any official record of the role that Specialist Yasmin Khoury played on the morning of August 14, 2004, in preventing what every Marine present, including the gunnery sergeant whose widow asked me not to use his name, later described privately as the closest they came in a 15-month deployment to a firefight that would have made the front page of every newspaper in the United States. The 40 armed men, the Marines, the mosque in the background, a dead elder, possibly, a dead imam, possibly, a dead specialist, possibly, the political consequences, the strategic consequences, the careers ended, the policies changed. None of it happened. Because of 2 hours on a rug. Because of a thermos of warm Lipton tea. Because a 24-year-old from Dearborn knew how to introduce herself to an old man in a way that told him, in the first 7 seconds, that she was not afraid of him, and she was not above him, and she was not going to lie to him. She left Iraq in June of 2005. She had been there 15 months. She extended her enlistment by 1 year so she could finish a second deployment, this one in Baghdad, in a different role, attached to a different unit. She came home in 2006. She separated from the Army in 2007. She went back to Georgetown on the GI Bill and finished her degree in 18 months. She applied to the State Department. She was accepted. She entered the Foreign Service as a junior officer in 2008, with a specialization in Arabic-speaking countries and a security clearance that she had earned the hard way. She has been at the State Department for 16 years now. She has served in 3 embassies. She has done 2 tours in Washington. She is now, at the time of this recording, a mid-career officer in a particular bureau in a particular building in Foggy Bottom, and she does work that I am not going to describe in any detail because I do not know it, and even if I knew it, I would not say it. What I will say is this. The State Department, like every large institution, has people in it who make a great deal of noise and people in it who do a great deal of work, and the overlap between those 2 groups is much smaller than the public believes. Yasmin Khoury, by every account I have been able to gather from the 4 people who would talk to me about her, none of whom would let me name them, is in the second group. She does the work. She does not make the noise. The people on her hallway think she is, in the words of one of her colleagues, the quiet one in the corner office who somehow always knows what's going on in Beirut before the cables come in. They do not know about Mosul. They do not know about the elder. They do not know about the rug. They do not know about the thermos. She has not told them. She has not told anyone. She did not even tell her father until 2011, 7 years after it happened, on a Sunday afternoon in his living room above the grocery, with her mother out of the house at a cousin's wedding, and her father sitting in his chair with the television off and a cup of coffee in his hand. She told him the story in Arabic in about 20 minutes, with very few details. When she finished, her father did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, in Arabic, "I told you the language was more dangerous than the gun." She said, "Yes, Baba." He said, "I did not know it could also be the opposite of the gun." She said, "Neither did I, Baba." He said, "I am proud of you." He said it once. He did not say it again. He did not need to. He had said it. They drank their coffee. The conversation moved on to her sister's children. He died in 2019. He was 63. It was a heart attack. In his chair, at the kitchen table above the grocery, in the early evening, with a cigarette burning in the ashtray. His own father had died the same way, at the same kind of desk, at almost the same age, 41 years earlier. Yasmin flew home from her post for the funeral. She gave the eulogy in 2 languages. She did not cry until she got back to her hotel that night. Then she cried for about an hour. Then she stopped. Then she went back to work. Her mother is still alive. Her mother lives with her sister now, in a house in Canton, Michigan, with the grandchildren close by. Yasmin calls every Sunday at 6 in the evening. She talks to her mother for an hour. She talks to her sister for as long as her sister wants to talk. She is never married. She has no children. She has, by her own description, in a single offhand line that one of her colleagues passed along to me, a very full life with a lot of empty corners. And she has said, more than once, that the empty corners are her own and she likes them. I want to come back to something now. I want to come back to the sentence I started this video with. The sentence on the after-action report. No incident. The thing about that sentence, the thing that has been bothering me for the entire 10 years I have been chasing this story, is that it is true. There was no incident. Nothing happened. A young woman drank tea with an old man for 2 hours. And at the end of the 2 hours, the old man went home, and the young woman went home, and the box was found, and the widow got her money, and the young man got his operation, and the war went on, and most of the people who were there that day are now dead or scattered, and the rug is presumably long since rotted away in the dust of an Iraqi street. And there is no monument, and no record, and no medal, and no name on a wall. Nothing happened. I want you to think about that. Because the entire premise of the kind of story this channel tells, the kind of story I have been telling for 2 years now, is that the things that matter leave traces. The things that matter end up on paper, eventually, even if the paper is buried, even if the paper is redacted, even if the paper takes 19 years to find. The things that matter are recoverable. That is the job. That is what I do. I find the paper. I read the paper. I tell you what is on the paper. I tell you what is missing from the paper. I give you back the names that the paper tried to forget. But the thing Yasmin Khoury did on August 14th, 2004, in the courtyard of a half square in Mosul, did not leave a trace. It left an absence. It left 2 contradictory sentences in a paragraph that nobody read for 19 years. It left a notebook entry from a captain who is now dead, a notebook in a box in his widow's attic in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It left a memory in the head of an elder who is also probably dead by now, and in the heads of 40 men, some of whom are also probably dead, and in the heads of 4 Marines, one of whom is dead, and in the head of a State Department officer who refuses to talk about it. That is all it left. Memories and dying heads. The thing she did exists in the world only as long as the last person who remembers it is still alive, and after that it does not exist at all. That is the part one cannot accept. That is the part that made me make this video. Even though I promised her I would change her name, and then I did change her name, and then I am still telling you that she is real. That is the part that makes me, in this moment, look directly at the camera and address her directly. Even though I am almost certain she is not watching, because she does not watch things like this, because she has never once in her life searched her own name on the internet, because she is the kind of person who closes the browser when the conversation turns to herself. Specialist Khoury. Yasmin, I changed your name. I changed the city. I moved the date by 3 weeks. I signed your papers. I sat in your building with your lawyer across the table from me, and I read 4 pages of your journal, and I did not copy a single word. I kept every promise I made to you except one. The one I am breaking right now. The one where I stand here and tell 200,000 strangers that you are real. That the rug was real. That the thermos was real. That the elder's photograph of his granddaughter in the pink dress with the missing tooth was real. That the $612 was real. That the widow got her money. That the young man got his operation. That none of it is in the file. That none of it will ever be in any file. That you did something that cannot be written on a form because the form does not have a box for it. And that I am building the box. Right now, this is the box. I know you will not forgive me for this. I know you will send me another one-line email with no signature. I know you will not call. I know you will go to work on Monday morning and walk down the hallway of that building in Foggy Bottom and sit at your desk and open your cables and drink your coffee, and nobody on that hallway will say a word about this video because nobody on that hallway watches this channel. Because the people on that hallway do not watch channels like this. They read cables. They read briefings. They read the things that are written down. And you will be fine. And the hallway will be quiet. And the work will continue. But somewhere in Mosul, or near Mosul, or in whatever city this actually happened in, there is a street where a dry fountain used to stand. And in front of that fountain there was once a rug. And on that rug a young woman from Michigan sat down with an old man from Iraq and drank tea for 2 hours. And at the end of those 2 hours, 40 rifles went home unfired, and a box was found, and a widow was paid, and a young man was healed. And a war continued, but one street, for one day, was quiet. That street does not know your name. The fountain does not know your name. The dust does not know your name. But I do. And now they do. I am sorry. And I am not. My daughter speaks 4 languages. Caroline. I have talked about her before on this channel. She is 16. She speaks English because she grew up in it. She speaks Spanish because her mother insisted on it. She speaks French because her school required it. She speaks a very small amount of Arabic because last year, for reasons she did not fully explain to me, she asked me to find her a tutor, and I found her a tutor, and she has been studying for 11 months, and she can now order coffee and ask for directions and say thank you in a way that would make a grocer on Warren Avenue nod in approval. None of those 4 languages taught her how to walk into a room the way Yasmin Khoury walked into that courtyard. None of them. Because what Khoury did was not about the words. The words were the vehicle. What she did was about the walking. She walked toward the thing that everyone else was backing away from. She walked toward it with a thermos and no rifle and no armor and no plan beyond the belief. The irrational, untrained, unsoldierly belief that if she sat down and listened long enough, the man across from her would eventually say the thing he actually meant, and when he said it, she would know what to do. I cannot teach Caroline that. I have tried. I have sat with her at the kitchen table and told her stories about people like Khoury, and she listens, the way teenagers listen, with one ear and half a face, and then she goes upstairs and does her homework. And I sit there at the table and I think, maybe the stories are enough. Maybe you do not teach someone to walk into a room. Maybe you just tell them, over and over, that someone once did it, and you describe the room, and you describe the walking, and then one day, 20 years from now, they are standing at the edge of something, and they remember the story, and they walk. Maybe that is what this is. Maybe this channel, this entire project, all of it, every video, every woman, every buried report, every redacted name, every thermos and every rug, is just me sitting at the kitchen table, telling my daughter stories about rooms that other women walked into. I hope so. I hope that is what it is. Because if it is not that, then I do not know what it is. The work continues. If you served with someone like Specialist Khoury, someone who walked into the room when everyone else was walking out, someone who sat down when everyone else was standing up, someone whose name is not on any wall and not in any file and not on any citation, I want you to go to the comments. I do not want you to tell me their story. Not yet. I just want you to write their first name. Just the first name. Nothing else. No rank. No unit. No location. Just the name. Let it sit there. Let it be the box that the form does not have. I will see it. They will not. But it will be there. Hatch out.